Hello, Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your last hurricane outlook and discussion for the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season. So glad you could join me today on this end of the season broadcast, day number 183. We began 183 days ago not knowing what would happen for the hurricane season ahead. Let's make this a little bit bigger, actually, if this will work. There we go. Mark Sutton in full screen. How about that? 180 days ago, we began this journey, and we talked about some of the things that were going to happen potentially on that broadcast that I did. I did that one live. I wanted to do this one as a recording because I think it's just easier to make things tighter and less can go wrong this way, and I can get more points across without having to worry about the broadcast going forward live. We'll do more live stuff next year, trust me. So anyway, we're done. The hurricane season is over. And a lot of people are going to be very glad about that, obviously, I guess everybody. And so what I wanted to do today was just kind of talk about where we came from, what the season was like, and go over some lessons learned and a couple of things that I want to talk about, some issues that need to be resolved going forward in terms of how we deal with hurricanes. So let's get right into it. These are the tracks here for all 17 named storms. We ended the season with 17 named storms, 10 of those became hurricanes, and a whopping 60% of the hurricanes, 6 of them, if you know your math, became Category 3 or higher. That is extremely rare to have happen. So the 2017 season, one of the top hurricane seasons of all time, and it set a lot of different records of which we will go over here in just a moment. So before we get started with the season and looking back at it retrospectively, what about the seasonal forecasts as we were preparing for the season? How did they do? This is one of my beefs, if you will. Not against the science, because you got to start somewhere, but just how accurate are they in terms of when they get issued, okay? And we'll get into that. So let's take a look here. Starting last December of 2016, the firm out of England, Tropical Storm Risk, we call it TSR, they were indicating 14, 6, and 3, so that's 14 named storms, 6 hurricanes, 3 intense. And then Colorado State University, as well as TSR, updated forecasts on April the 6th, 5th or 6th, early April we'll call it. Colorado State University at that initial time, Dr. Phil Klotzbach and his colleagues were calling for a slightly below average season. So I don't have the luxury of a soundboard like a radio station has or TV shows like Jim Cramer, I guess. He presses those buttons and different wacky sounds play. But if I had one, that would be one of those sounds because those forecasts were wrong. The season was not below average. And that was made in April based on the fact that it looked like a substantial El Nino was going to develop, mainly based on information from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, as well as the Climate Forecast System, the CFS. I'm not just going to single out the Euro, but the Euro was very robust in suggesting an El Nino for this year, and we have the opposite in place, a La Nina. So who would have thought, right? So the April forecasts were no good. Even the one from NC State and the Weather Channel, as you move through April into May, we were getting closer, 14 named storms or so. Then finally at the end of May, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, along with the National Hurricane Center, issuing their forecast for as many as 17 named storms. And that's a pretty good spread there, 11 to 17. You're probably going to be right. 5 to 8 hurricanes, so they missed that one. We had 10 hurricanes. And 2 to 4 major hurricanes. That was severely missed by everybody, is what it pretty much comes down to. Until later on, once you get into August, NOAA, as well as Colorado State and TSR, all upped their forecasts, indicating a very busy season, which I would have to say, well, duh, I mean, it was upon us. But that's my thing, and we're going to talk about this at the end. I'll give you a hint. We usually don't see these hyperactive seasons coming until they're already upon us. 2005 is a great lesson. 2017 is a reminder of that lesson. So we also had Joe Bastardi and his team that worked with him at Weatherbell. And in April or March, whenever it was, I guess it was, what is this? Yeah, March 31st. It's right there. They were calling for above average activity. He was saying that the yellow area would have below normal activity, with the majority of the red area being above average activity. So yellow below, red above. The late March, you can just call it April 1st, honestly. Weatherbell forecast, wrong. It was way, way, way too low. Now, they issued an update to this forecast in June, and this sort of was right in terms of the red zone, but the ACE index and the totals of all the storms and everything still off the mark. However, Weatherbell and Joe Bastardi do a great job of looking at the patterns and trying to understand the pattern that we are in on a global scale and giving hints as to what to look for. I want to give credit where credit is due. People are trying to hit these numbers exactly or close to it. It's hard to do. I get that. But I think their strength is in the pattern recognition. And I have learned a lot from Joe Bastardi over the years. And you can say what you want about and have opinions about how he is, how he talks about politics and global warming and anything else, or he gets too excited or hyped up. Hey, that's your opinion. That is fine. I don't have any allegiance to Joe. I like him as a meteorologist. He is going to be wrong sometimes, and he's going to be right sometimes. And I like his pattern recognition stuff, and I learned a lot from it, as well as a lot of other people in the field. And I think he did very well with that in noticing with the downturn of Pacific activity, the Western Pacific was pretty much dead, that it's got to be focused in the Atlantic. And so that's pretty much what happened. Now, also, Jim Williams, who he and I go way back. I think he started HurricaneCity.com back in 1997 or so. I started HurricaneTrack.com back in 1999. And Jim does this prediction where he picks the different cities that should be impacted, etc. And this is a map from his 2017 forecast, if you will. And Jim is just a weather enthusiast. I say just. I mean, you know what I mean? He doesn't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. It's not his career by any means. He's very in tune with it. He's got a long-standing reputation of putting out these nowcast real-time videos live. I mean, all the way back to 2005. If it wasn't for Jim Williams, I wouldn't have any recording of what we recorded in Katrina from our early storm surge cameras. That's a story for another day. But, you know, he does paving, a resurfacing company. I don't know the name of it, but that's what he does as his day job. So he makes these predictions. He lives in Florida on the southeast coast, and so he has, I guess he does have a dog in the fight because he lives there. Nevertheless, this is what he was showing. The white lines were what he was showing. I forget I can draw on this. These were the predicted tracks that Jim had. He figured this would be late in the season. These would be early. Those were not necessarily correct, but the tracks were uncanny. And when he predicted these on May the 15th. All right. So look, the white is what he predicted, and the red is what actually happened. See, that's pretty good. There's Nate's track. This was Irma. You know, is that just blind luck? I don't know. I mean, he's got some methodology, but you know, kudos to Jim. He got those tracks right. I think that's a little bit better than just saying somewhere in this area you're going to have some hurricanes. It's like, duh. But anyway, way to go, Jim Williams. Good job there. Maybe you're on to something, and we'll see. All right, so getting into some of the meat and potatoes of this, I'm going to go back to full screen for a moment. So the season began June 1st, but we had, of course, Arlene as a tropical storm that started out in April, and it was an out-of-season storm up in the subtropics, and so that really was not an indicator of what was to come. That did not happen down in the deep tropics. If we had had Arlene form from some rogue tropical wave in April, man, I think that would have definitely been the obvious sign that the season meant business. So we really don't have to worry about Arlene too much in terms of what it meant. So we can sort of move past this. It happened in April, again in the subtropics, and it was not a indicator of what was to come. However, this next one, though, by the way, this is off of Wikipedia. Great information that people have put on there. I support Wikipedia, and you should too. I think we need stuff like this. I don't have time to write up this kind of stuff, and somebody's doing it, and it seems accurate, and it's a great place to have instant information from people who have apparently the time to put it together. So I wanted to give that kudos to Wikipedia and the people that are behind it. Thank you very much, because it makes today's presentation that much easier. That's why I donate. All right, so Brett, in mid-June or so, towards the last third of June, was a tropical wave, okay, that came off Africa. So it was a precursor as to what was coming. And Brett was the earliest tropical storm to form in the so-called main development region in the satellite era. So Brett was one of those check marks that you put in the column for, oh boy, this could be a bad season ahead. Along with Brett, we had tropical storm Cindy in the same time frame. Cindy formed from this large monsoonal gyre, low-pressure area in the Gulf of Mexico, very loosely organized. It was not a well-developed tropical storm. The wind field was not very well confined or consolidated to an area around the core, so it was not like a wind event. Instead, Cindy was remembered for a lot of rainfall. It had a couple of fatalities associated with it, unfortunately. And it was, you expect something to form in the Gulf of Mexico every couple of years, and Cindy kind of fit that bill. So we really can't say that, oh, there's another one, Cindy, another indication of a busy season. But once we got to Tropical Depression 4 at the end of June, also another west coast of Africa tropical wave. It only made it to tropical depression status, but it did originate off of Africa in the main development region, and it was another, sort of half check mark in the column that it was going to be a very busy season. And then really Dawn in July, mid-July, was the one that we thought, well, once we saw Dawn form, as short-lived as it was, that was it. I thought, all right, it is going to be a very busy season. We're probably going to have a lull, like we usually do, from mid-July until mid-August, and then the real hurricane season will begin. I talked about that often on the Hurricane Outlook and discussion videos, despite a couple of people, and it's only a couple, and I think they do it for their own enjoyment, naysaying it. Oh, what are you talking about? Nothing's going to happen. And, you stand corrected. Let's just say that. And I hate being right, but in this case, I was right. And it's not just me. It's not like I am some genius that figured out something that nobody else did. We look collectively at the consensus of what people are thinking all across message boards, social media, and other entities that forecast not just the National Hurricane Center, but other entities, private and just weather nerds, right? Weather weenies that are on this stuff. We all think about it, and we can all see what's coming, and I just am apparently in the position to be able to report about it and to talk about it. And it was interesting to see a couple of people here and there, just giving me a hard time throughout that nothing was going to happen, that I was talking out of my rear end, and it amuses me because I was like, okay, you'll see. Hopefully those people do not live where these things impacted, and that they're not having their humble pie in a FEMA trailer. All right. Tropical Storm Emily started sort of with a frontal system in the Gulf of Mexico, really caught a lot of people by surprise. Interesting, though, that Emily and the associated moisture with it created a lot of flooding down here in the downtown Miami area where some of the pumps were having issues. Kind of reminded us of New Orleans with those issues there. The Brickell area, little did I know that I would be in the Brickell area myself just a few weeks later for Irma. But Emily had an impact. As weak and small and fast forming as it was, it definitely had an impact. But again, sort of one of these like rogue storms that kind of comes out of nowhere, not out of the deep tropics. So this wasn't necessarily a precursor of what was to come. And again, it was still in late July. Finally, we started getting the hurricanes. I say finally, you know what I mean. And there was 10 of those in a row. Think about that for a second. We started with Franklin, all right, and then we went and rattled off 10 in a row. And I don't think that's ever happened before either. So that was the first thing that began, was the record of 10 hurricanes in a row. So Hurricane Franklin, Josh Morgerman, iCyclone, he went down to Mexico and intercepted Franklin, for what it's worth. And if you follow Josh on social media and his website, you can see about that. Hopefully he has posted that by now. You would think that I already know that he would or wouldn't, but there's so much going on. I think I've seen that video, but it's definitely on Twitter from his intercept down there in Mexico. Then we had Gert out in the middle of the Atlantic. No big deal, right? Didn't really bother anybody. And then between Gert and this next one, we'll go full screen again here. All right, we had something called the Great American Eclipse. Now, how many of you saw that in person, the totality? I did. I took my kids down to South Carolina to Lake Marion to see it, and I really appreciate the family down there that invited us to stay in their home and their travel trailer out in the backyard and be able to witness that out on Lake Marion. So, David and your family, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hope you guys are doing well. We'll have to visit again soon as things calm down around here. So the eclipse, why did I bring that up? That has nothing to do with the hurricane season. Well, for me, it did, because that was August 21st. We had already had Harvey form, and we go back to medium resolution here. I already had Harvey form. Let's pull this up so I can show you. And then it kind of died away. Remember, all through here in the graveyard, the no man's land of the Caribbean. And right about this time, we were getting closer to the eclipse time. I left Wilmington and went over here to South Carolina with my kids. And then Harvey came off the Yucatan. And I got home the night of the 21st after seeing one of the most spectacular events of my entire life. And I packed everything in the Tahoe that I possibly could. Luckily, everything is small now and easy to do so. And I hit the road for Texas. My colleague, Carrie, who lives in Houston, he was up in Wyoming checking out the eclipse with a gentleman named Todd, who is one of our assistants. He's been helping us out this year. And by the way, that has been a wonderful thing to have people helping out. It takes the stress off of me a little bit. We'll get to that later. But he was coming back from Wyoming, and I was likely to beat him to Houston from North Carolina. But I am very glad that I left on that Tuesday morning to make that trek down here to the Gulf Coast to get ready for what was going to be the costliest hurricane in United States history. And did you know that? It's true. Harvey has ended up that it is the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. So Harvey forms again off the Yucatan, and you remember on the Hurricane Outlook and discussion videos as we were talking about it, that my biggest concern was that short amount of time over that distance between the Yucatan and Texas that Harvey could rapidly intensify. And that's exactly what happened. It made it to Category 4 intensity. That's what it looked like at landfall. Absolutely incredible, and we were there for that. Now, I don't want to give too much away because I am working on the documentary of the 2017 season. We elected not to get into the core of Harvey because it was hitting at night, and it was hitting in an area that I was not very comfortable with. I didn't know the region that well. We had some unmanned camera systems set up, but because we knew for a fact the day of landfall, that 24 hours leading up, that Harvey would make landfall at night, I felt that safety certainly was precedent over trying to get the money shot. So we figured, we knew at that point that Harvey would have a second round of impact up in the Houston area, and we made sure we were ready for that. And I think we documented that as best as anybody could do with just 2 vehicles, a few unmanned cameras, and almost no budget. And again, we'll get to that too, especially in the documentary. However, we did do some good work down in the Corpus Christi area. We put a weather station on the bridge over there on the southwest part of the bay, and we captured some excellent data. If we had the station here, Harvey went like this past the station. It could have come into Corpus Christi. Who knows at that point? And we'll talk about the future of the weather stations in a moment as well. So Harvey, it could be its own 2-hour program, believe me. But it was the first since Wilma, Category 3. Of course, Harvey was a 4, so we call it a major hurricane. It was the first one in almost 12 years, and it made landfall near Port Aransas, the Rockport area. And then, of course, they have that legacy of the tremendous rainfall, unbelievable 5 feet of rain or more in some areas, the epic flooding in Houston. Again, we're going to cover this extensively in the documentary that I'm still working on, and you'll see. Absolutely incredible. All right. Irma, as I'm on my way back to North Carolina from Texas, we have Irma forming. Come on, little thing. And I just knew. Sometimes you just know. You've done this long enough, you see the track, you see the models, and it had that dip. So this is going to hit the United States. I knew as well as I can know without actually knowing, right? Without having some kind of, 50-year almanac of hurricane history like in Back to the Future Part 2 when Biff Tannen went and stole the sports almanac. Aside from having some sci-fi fantasy like that, I just knew that Irma was going to be a problem for the United States, and that's exactly what it was. I left North Carolina where I thought it could come up to North Carolina. I really did. It was very worrisome, especially considering some of the modeling. You guys remember that. And everything shifted. And it only shifted so much, And again, it's all about that angle. 200 miles farther to the east, and it would have come up the east side easily of Florida and into the Carolinas and Georgia and been a devastating storm surge event, probably unprecedented. And as bad as it was, this is a case, Irma, it definitely could have been worse, especially for Naples. I want the people in southwest Florida to understand that had the track of Irma been about 5 to 10 miles farther to the west, further to the west, doesn't matter, more to the west, the center, had it been shifted 5 to 10 miles west from where it made landfall, it went right over Marco Island and right over Naples. That's what spared you guys the big storm surge. Had it come in a little bit more to the north, let's say it made landfall up in Port Charlotte instead of Marco Island, there would have been probably 6 to maybe 15 feet, depending on the location of where those areas are, of storm surge flooding that would have been unprecedented in terms of damage. Maybe not much loss of life because a lot of people evacuated, very smart people down in Florida. They know when to leave. And so those 10 to 15 foot surge forecasts did not come true because it made landfall right over that area. And luckily, it kept the surge to a minimum. But the potential was absolutely there, and you guys got lucky by just that much, 5 to 10 miles farther to the west, and it would have been a completely different story. For the record, we had a camera down in Marathon along with a weather station. The entire network along the Keys went out just a few hours, not even that, probably an hour before the Corps went over the Florida Keys. Everybody went out, so it wasn't just our equipment. The weather station kept on recording internally. We use one of these right here, Raspberry Pi computer, and it just kept on going. We have some excellent data from the east side, but we weren't in the core with the weather station, unfortunately. And the camera system, it only records if it is streaming. We use Ustream, which is now IBM Cloud Video. It works fantastic when it's live, but if you cut the network, it's gone, and no, we do not have a backup of that. Now, we will in the future. We've already solved that problem. Don't worry. But, it's just one of those things. You're just like, ugh, it went offline, nothing we could do about it. As the Corps approached Marco Island, the same thing happened. One of the switches in southwest Collier County took a hit, and the backbone, what we call the back end, went out. And again, most of the storm chasers on Marco and our unmanned camera system all went out at the same time. Nothing you can do about it. But the camera in Naples stayed up, and it was absolutely incredible. I want to show you. I think I've got that right here. Let's move me out of the way. The camera system in Naples. If you didn't see it, this is what it looked like. This is a couple minutes long, and I'm just going to let it play. This is the night that we set it up, probably within an hour. So this is nighttime, Saturday night into Sunday. Here we are Sunday morning. The sun's just coming up. A little breezy, no big deal. Rain's coming down, Sun is up. Now we're about mid-morning. Tropical storm force winds are coming in, heavier rain bands. And at this point, we're still not sure if Irma's core is going to go over Naples or not. It's not a sure thing just yet. So as things progress, the tree falls. Close up of that. Oh, poor tree. That's rough. That thing's been there a long time. And then finally the other side goes, and then the eye wall hits. And this was absolutely incredible. My goodness. I can't believe it worked as well as it did. Look at that. Every time I watch this, I'm just in awe that we captured this using off-the-shelf technology. Look at the surge coming in down at the bottom. That is storm surge from some of the canals bleeding over onto this street. Look at the water being whipped up by the wind. Unbelievable. I mean, if I hadn't have been there to set this camera up, I wouldn't have believed that this really happened. It's just incredible to be able to see this and how good the quality is. I mean, we're in an eye wall of a Cat 3 hurricane, and the video is absolutely spectacularly clear. And then speaking of clear, now the eye comes over. One of the most amazing moments of our remote camera system's existence. There it is. I mean, how absolutely cool is that? It is so tragic that they cause so much harm and death and anxiety because, my goodness, that is amazing considering what we just saw. Look at that. And the camera system stayed up. The Weather Channel used it. We had thousands of people watching it online. Just a remarkable testament of getting the shot without having to be there in person. And then the backside comes, and you know the rest of the story. So that was Irma. Like I said, we learned a lot from that by losing the Marco Island and the marathon feeds. We now have a system to archive everything using GoPro cameras and extended battery packs. So that problem has been solved for future events. And we will be migrating towards using Nest cams as our remote cams. The technology has evolved. They try to connect. They don't try, they do. When they lose connectivity to the network that they're connected to, if that network comes back up, the camera will reconnect. Those are the Nest cams. For those of you familiar with those, you know that that's going to be a fantastic change and a very positive one for our unmanned camera project. All right, moving along, we had Jose. And of course, with Irma, there's a whole other backstory of the effect on the islands. And I got to tell that in the documentary. Again, it's unbelievable. This gentleman, I'll give you a real quick preview. This guy named Mikro, who lives on St. Bart's, was reaching out to me through Facebook, fearing for his life. And never before in my career have I ever had someone ask me, what do I need to do to live through this hurricane? I think I might die. And to have that responsibility on top of me, trying to get him to do things that I'm telling him to do to live through a 185 mile per hour direct hit on an island. Are you kidding me? While I'm trying to get ready to go to Florida and deal with Irma myself. I'm not complaining, and I'm not saying woe is me. I'm saying, wow, that has never happened before, and I'm going to tell that story as best I can in the documentary. So on the heels of Irma, we have Jose coming, and it looked like it might come through the same area. It was pretty close. Luckily, it spared them the worst. Then we had Katia, which was in the southwest Gulf of Mexico. And then, of course, Hurricane Lee, very well developed, small hurricane out in the open Atlantic. And then there was Maria. And Maria, what can you say about this one? The legacy of this storm, this hurricane, will be remembered for generations. All of these will, but Maria with its own special place in that because of what it's still doing to Puerto Rico. That scores and scores of people are fleeing Puerto Rico, hurricane refugees. This is a real thing. This is not some hyperbolic, you hear about climate refugees, and I agree there's probably some of those in some of these islands in the Pacific, this climate change refugee idea. A lot of times that gets blown out of proportion from where the reality is. But with a hurricane, it is a singular, one-time event that is having ripple effects now, and it will continue to do so as people recover or give up on recovering and move either to the mainland United States or somewhere else. Now think about this. Hundreds of thousands of people, from the reports that I've read, and unfortunately in this day and age, are those reports true? I hate that I have to even ask that, but you know what I'm talking about. It's like, God, what do we believe anymore? But the reports are that scores of people, hundreds of thousands, are leaving Puerto Rico permanently. If they're coming to the United States, then they can vote. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So Maria, what can I say? The people, I'm going to go down to Puerto Rico at the 6-month anniversary of Maria and do a follow-up myself. There's a guy down there that I'm going to meet with. He and I have been in contact with each other, and name is Carlos. I think that's right. I hope it's right. And I can't wait to meet him in person. The stuff that he has sent me, the compelling stories, the video, the photos, I cannot wait to get down there as a geographer and as an earth scientist to see what Maria has done to the landscape, but also the people that live on that landscape and within the landscape. So I'm going to go down there at the 6-month anniversary. Then there was Nate. And Nate was our most successful overall mission of the season. Everything we set up worked all the way until the batteries ran out. We had no failures of any kind. The weather station recorded probably some of the only hurricane force winds associated with Nate. We placed it perfectly. We switched it from Gulfport at the harbor over to Biloxi Bay on the bridge there, and we got one wind gust to exactly 75 miles per hour. The sustained winds were strong tropical storm. Nate was undergoing a transition. It was losing its convection, so it was kind of being eroded away from the bottom up, if you will. So there was not very much wind damage. There was some flooding, but there was probably anywhere from 6 to 9 feet of storm surge flooding above ground level in some places. Not everywhere, but some places. The Hurricane Center and the USGS will have to assess that. But again, our camera system that was there recorded that, and it was absolutely remarkable. Live on the Weather Channel as it was happening from the remote cam. And it was the first time that we got to test the new long-duration GoPro system, and it worked very well at the same time. And we're going to really do a lot with that in the future. Then we had Ophelia, and Ophelia, of course, ended up as a major hurricane way out in the open Atlantic there, eventually ending up in the British Isles region, impacting Ireland rather substantially. And then that was it. After Ophelia, that was the 10th hurricane. And then we had Philippe, and then we had Rena, and that's pretty much it for the season, thank goodness. All right, so before we get into looking ahead to 2018, what do you think about the season? How did it impact you? In the comments and on social media, Twitter or Facebook, let me know. I want to know how you dealt with the season that we have just gone through. What were these 183 days like for you? For me, this is my job. Like I said, I graduated college and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't know that this was what it was going to end up being per se, but I knew that I wanted to be a hurricane expert and report on hurricanes and study hurricanes and then teach people based on what I learn. It's just, I don't know where it came from. I really don't. But that's what I do. And so for me, the beginning of the 183 days is more like a mystery. How is it going to end? Or that movie, The Truman Show. Remember they had little buttons. How will it end? And we don't know when things start how it will end. Luckily for me and my family, I mean, I'm recording this in my office, which is in my home in North Carolina. I was really worried about Irma. I really was. I thought this could be the one that actually takes out my house if it comes to North Carolina as strong as some of the modeling is indicating. So how did it affect you? Did you have to evacuate? We're going to talk about evacuation. Were you nervous the entire season? If so, why? Were you not understanding some of the forecasts? What could be done better to help you better understand how hurricanes might impact you? Things like this. I want to know. So in the comments section, please do me a favor, sort of as a halfway scientific poll. How did the hurricane season affect you? And you can send me an email to Hurmark, HURRMARK, @gmail.com. All right, you go to the website, HurricaneTrack.com, and email me from there. So looking ahead to 2018. Now, before you say, oh, goody, we're going to talk about it from a meteorological perspective, you can just go ahead and turn it off now, because what am I going to know now that's going to have any impact on next year? I mean, it really comes down to two things. Is there going to be an El Nino? We don't know. I mean, honestly, the models just completely blew it for this year. And will the Atlantic be in a warm phase or a cold phase? Those are the two most important underlying bedrock questions that we cannot answer on November 30th or December 15th or March 1st or even April 5th. We can't do it. It's not there yet. The global models are good, but they're not that good. The climate models, etc., it's just not time. We need more time. So I'm not going to talk about predictions for next year. It's mainly going to be wait and see. And that's what the off-season outlook and discussions are meant to do, is once a week, and I'll talk about this again at the end, we get together right here and I'll discuss, usually on a Monday or a Tuesday, what does it look like? We will look at sea surface temperature anomalies, thoughts on sea surface temperature patterns, and thoughts on the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, going forward. We've done that for the last few years. I will continue to do that going into next year. So looking ahead to 2018, we have some issues that we need to deal with. Seriously, folks, all right? Now, these are not complaints about you from me. It's just what I see in the bigger picture. We really have a bad hurricane problem in this country. And I know that's like, well, tell us something we don't know, Mark. It's worse than I thought. It really was. I thought we learned a lot after 2005. I hoped that we did. And 2008 with the siege that we had, with Ike especially. And it just seems like we're not moving forward like we should. People building in floodplains, the bad decisions being made basically by planners and developers to build in ways that are not sustainable when we have these bad disasters. It's ridiculous. Now that takes policy change, and that is way beyond the scope of anything that I can do. The other part of it is the social issue, and we'll get to that. I'm stepping ahead here. Like people understanding the hazards, that's one of the topics I'm going to talk about, and then understanding evacuation. So let's get to the next thing. First up, the issues, and I'm going to preface this like I did earlier. I've got no problem with people, and even if I had a problem, who cares, right? Mark has a problem with that. So what? It's funny the way I said it. I'm sorry. Back on track. Seasonal outlooks, as I've said before, you got to start somewhere. The science is still relatively new. You think about Colorado State's been doing this going back to the 80s or so, something like that. I think that's right. With Dr. William Gray, the late Dr. Gray. And there's still a lot to be done, and I don't know what the solution is. Is it going to be more computing power? I have no clue. I don't know the answer. But you do have to start somewhere. I do know that. And the thing about seasonal outlooks is this. You're not going to know if a hyperactive season is going to happen until it's happening, is my opinion at this point. It was a big failure in 2005. We didn't see it coming until it was already on us, and it was a big failure again this year. And even if the predictions were absolutely on the mark, like Jim Williams had pretty good tracks there with his predictions in mid-May, that didn't tell us anything about the impact or how strong those storms will be. So even if we can determine it will be an active season and most of the activity will be in this region, which is again what Weather Bell and Joe Bastardi are trying to hone in on, it's hard to know what the impacts are going to be. How can anybody have predicted what would happen with Harvey? Yes, you can have the Category 4 hurricane come in. That is not too uncommon, wind-wise. But who thought that 5 feet of rain was going to fall? And that would end up being the costliest hurricane, tropical cyclone, period, in United States history. These things cannot be addressed in a seasonal outlook. They never will be able to. And I hate saying never when it comes to science, because I think a lot of things science can solve. But, you can look at it and you can say, let's look at it this way. Your doctor says, hey, you're overweight, your blood pressure is high, you're eating too much sweets. You got to tone it down or something bad's going to happen. That's the outlook. He can't tell you, I think that a stroke is going to happen sometime between December and January if you don't start doing something to prevent that. We're not there yet medically, right? The same thing holds true for seasonal hurricane outlooks. We can look ahead and say, hey, everything looks like it's going to be a bad season, but we just don't know where exactly, or more to the point, what those impacts will be. So we'll keep following the seasonal outlooks. I think they're a good sort of guidepost, but don't look at the seasonal outlooks as the determining factor as to whether or not you are going to do something to be hurricane prepared. The next thing, so many people still don't understand the hazards of tropical cyclones. They see a hurricane coming on a map, they see me talking about it in these discussions, but they don't understand what does that mean. The outer bands, how much rain will they bring, the wind field, the storm surge, how complicated that is in terms of who's going to get what amounts of flooding, the rainfall, and then dealing with the core of the hurricane itself. Not to mention all the stress that goes along with preparing, and all of that goes into understanding the cyclone hazards. And that's why I was so worried about Irma up here in coastal North Carolina, is because I do understand hurricane hazards. And I was like, oh, this is not good. I can chuckle about it now because my house is still here. Irma didn't come up this way, thank goodness. But I saw it for what it was. I thought, this is the one that if it hits here, we're going to be in real trouble. And I realized this is what I do for a living, but we got to have some way where more people can thoroughly understand the entirety of what a tropical storm and a hurricane is all about. Sort of demystify it, desensationalize it, and make it more so that you understand it almost like a living thing. It's not, but understand it like it is. We study snakes, reptiles, birds, amphibians, whatever, the animal kingdom. We need to do the same better with hurricanes and explaining them. Let's put it this way. When you see a rattlesnake, you automatically know, don't mess with that. Most of us do, right? I do. I'm not a herpetologist. Isn't that who studies those things? You should know. You don't mess with a rattlesnake. Any tropical storm or hurricane, you have to respect it just like you would the rattlesnake or the dangerous crocodile or the alligator or whatever it is, right? And we're missing that. I think people see this more as a news item and as a hyped up event, and they get lost in that, and they don't understand exactly what's coming their way. Some dogs outside or something, speaking of dangerous creatures. So we got to work on that, all right? I'll do my part to try to explain things even better going forward. And that's why I point out things in the discussions from the National Hurricane Center, as well as the hurricane local statements. Now this one's a real big deal here, evacuation, all right? So you got to take everything in this office and pack it up and get it out because a major flood is coming. To me, that would be beyond stressful. It would be like, oh, you got to be kidding me. It's just like moving, but it's temporary, right? It's only for a few days. And we hate moving as families. Moving sucks. How about packing all your stuff up that you want to save and evacuate because a force of nature may come in and destroy your house? Well, not everybody's going to face that, and not everybody has to evacuate. Next season, I can't talk anymore. Maybe I'm having the stroke. Next season, I am going to do better at talking about evacuation, because I saw too many people evacuating for Irma great distances that didn't have to do so. And that anxiety and that stress and being without gasoline and wondering where you're going to stay, where you're going to eat, how do I take care of the kids, the pets, grandma, grandpa, whatever, your job, you're being far from home, what are things going to be like when I get back? People don't understand the evacuation process, and Irma was another example of that. We evacuate for one reason, mostly, and that is storm surge flooding. Or if you live in a home that is not substantial enough to survive hurricane force winds, or if you feel like you just don't want to be where the hurricane is coming. I get that part. But the third part is not part of the evacuation planning process from the government, from the emergency managers, from the Corps of Engineers, and from the engineering firms that produce hurricane evacuation studies. People leaving because they're scared is not the same as people leaving because they should leave. How do we communicate that better and convince people you're better off staying in your home than getting on the highway for no good reason? Yes, there are people that have special needs, oxygen, medical issues. I understand that. So we have to separate it and filter it better, sift through that, and really tackle this thing of evacuation so that we don't end up with 750 miles of vehicles, as I personally saw with my own two eyes as I drove from Florida, Naples, Florida, all the way up to Conyers, Georgia. I don't know if that's 750 miles or not. It's close. And there was not a single break in the southbound traffic as people were coming back at all, more than 10 feet. It was wall-to-wall traffic, and those people had to be tired and stressed, low on money, some of them probably spending the last bit of their money to even do it. It is a major problem. Evacuation in this country is not handled properly. And one day, something's going to happen when there's too many people evacuating that's going to lead to a huge loss of life, way more than we saw with Rita back in 2005, where more people were killed in that evacuation than were killed by the hurricane itself. We've got to do better. I don't have the answer today, but I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to do more on my part going forward next year and beyond. All right, so these are the issues that I think are the top three. Don't worry about the seasonal forecasts so much in terms of making it as a determining factor on whether or not you're going to prepare. You should prepare anyway and really be educated. That's the best thing you can do. Buying a generator or storm shutters or all the other stuff, if you don't understand what you're up against, none of that stuff matters. So that's the first thing, is really understand the hazards, educate yourself, ask questions, reach out to me. I usually respond. I don't think there's anybody that I ignore on purpose, and I will do the best I can. There's a couple people, but whatever. I have to smile sometimes because this is very serious. The seasonal forecast, those are hopefully going to get better. And then, of course, understanding the hazards and the evacuation issue. We got to do better. 2017 was bad, and we go back full screen before I sign off here. But I want to put it to you in a different perspective. As bad as it was, we still haven't had something like a Katrina that's coming in where that the final result in this one geographic area that's bounded on either side by the hurricane and storm surge warnings now is going to be horrible. Irma always kept us guessing for the United States part. For the islands and going to Maria, of course, we knew that was coming. So I'm not talking about the islands, I'm talking about the U.S. impacts here. Harvey, we knew it was going to be pretty bad at the Cat 4 landfall point down in Texas, north of Corpus in the Rockport area. Okay? But the other part was like an unfolding saga. Katrina and Rita to some extent, but definitely Katrina and Andrew back in 1992, and Sandy even in 2012. These rare, thankfully, events where you know that the train is coming and it's going to be bad when it wrecks. We didn't really have that this year on the front end, where you knew it was going to be catastrophic. It could be catastrophic, and it was catastrophic with Harvey in a different way with the flooding, but people weren't really ready for that. You can't visualize that, but you can think back to Katrina and what the storm surge did in Mississippi, and the storm surge flooding and the failure of the levees did in New Orleans, and we haven't had that in a long time. And that's really what it comes down to. The flood from Harvey is a benchmark in U.S. hurricane history. Katrina was that for storm surge, as Camille was many, many decades before in 1969. Not since Katrina and Ike as well have we had that massive wall of water come ashore in a major populated area. Tampa, Norfolk, Houston area, they're very vulnerable to storm surge, and none of what happened in Houston was related to storm surge, by the way. It was all rainfall. And of course the Mississippi Gulf Coast and pretty much all of the northern Gulf Coast. All of those regions very vulnerable to storm surge flooding, as well as the Northeast. Okay? We haven't had that event since Katrina to that extent. Thank goodness. We've had some close calls and some bad ones, Sandy included, but as bad as this season was, at least we didn't have to deal with 28 feet of surge coming in to an area like we saw in 2005. That is the part that really worries me the most, that people don't understand, they don't evacuate properly, and we have a huge loss of life in an area that hasn't seen a surge like that in a generation or more. And that would be the Tampa area as an example. I mentioned Norfolk. That's a very surge-prone area, and even parts of the Northeast. Sandy was bad, but it can get a lot worse. So we're done. The season is over. We did a lot. We accomplished a lot. Hopefully we learned a lot as a country and as members and what's the word? I'm like citizens. That's the word. I wish I could go back and record that again. As citizens of these other countries that were impacted, we learned a lot. We suffered a lot, but you move forward. You really do, and hopefully you move forward stronger, not only physically but emotionally. I know it's draining. I know that it's tough. I really do. I'm not just saying that. I have come to know people who have dealt with these things themselves, and it's terrible. It really is. So I'm with you. I'm on your side. I hope that you learned some stuff from me this year. We have accomplished a lot, and it's all because of you. And as I end things, I want to remind you, very much like public radio, we are supported by you guys on the other end. So if you want to contribute, it's all crowdfunded, and this is what I do. Not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week or anything, but you can send a contribution or become a long-time patron, or long-time, either one works. And those of you that purchased the app, at least we got to update the Android version this year. We're going to be doing more with the apps next year, and hopefully even having an iPad version as we go into 2018. So I appreciate it. Before I let you go, I got to remind you, because this is important. I don't turn the lights off and shut the office down until June 1st. Starting next Monday, just a few days from now, I will have what we call the off-season Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Once a week, all right? I will publish on YouTube. It goes to our app, of course, and all of our social media. A look ahead. And we look at, like I said, sea surface temperatures, some of the forecasts, just kind of, like people do when the NFL season's over or the college basketball season's over, and we look ahead to the draft or whatever. There's always speculation and always things to talk about. And in our case, with weather, I'll be on the lookout for big winter storms. We're getting ready to change the pattern. It is 74 degrees right now outside in my backyard on November 30th. 10 days from now, it's probably going to be 43 degrees. So the winter storms are going to be coming, and I cover those now, the big East Coast events, and they help us. They really do. It keeps me in tune, so to speak. I'll be testing the new Nest cameras. I'm going to be doing more on Periscope. I did nothing on Periscope this year, and I regret that. I will be using Periscope more in 2018, and we're going to keep moving forward. And with your help, it'll be unprecedented hurricane coverage by a group of misfits, if you will. I'm kidding about that, but we do what we can. We love what we do. The guys that work with me, and we have so many people on the back end that have stepped up and helped out, and I appreciate all of that from everybody. It all adds up and it all matters. So that is it from me for this hurricane season. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Don't forget, once a week, the off-season version of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion is coming. Have a great rest of your November, what's left of it. Thanks for tuning in all hurricane season long. I'll see you in the off-season, and then before you know it, it'll be June 1st, and 2018's hurricane season will begin again. I'll talk to you later.